Today I'm going to talk about animal classification. I'll be dealing with different terms that is involved in classification and how animals are being classified. So the first term, taxonomy, it is actually the theory, practice and the rules that is involved in naming and classifying the whole animal kingdom. Animals that are alive as well as extinct forms, extant as well as extinct forms of animals, how they are classified. That is actually taxonomy, the theory, practice and the rules of naming and classifying all animals. Taxonomy is a scientific system that classifies organisms into categories based on their biological characteristics. Whereas taxonomy and systematics both go hand in hand, and systematics, it is a comparative study of the variations in animal population used to reveal their evolutionary relationships. A comparative study of variations where similarity as well as dissimilarity is taken into consideration. The whole diverse living organisms, they are arranged into coherent units, and these coherent units are called taxa, and the singular for taxa is taxon. A taxon is a group of organisms that can be classified as a single unit. These taxa are recognized and named according to the shared characteristics and evolutionary relatedness of their members. There are 7 main taxonomic ranks, when you say a group of organisms, how that group of organisms or a taxon comes into being, that is mainly based on these 7 main taxonomic ranks that you are able to convert it into a taxa. They are kingdom, phylum or division, class, order, family, genus, as well as the last one, the species. These characteristics could be morphological, molecular, as well as based on their genes and metagenome. The earlier practice was classification was mainly based on morphological features, but nowadays it is molecular. It's usually based on genes as well as metagenome. And the assignment of specific names to each taxon or unit is known as nomenclature. It is known as nomenclature. So this is how Panthera pardus comes into being. Kingdom, Animalia, so based on all animals. So it's the general characteristics that is taken into account. In this slide, I'm sharing 2 species. One is Homo Sapiens, the other one is Panthera pardus. Kingdom Animalia. For Homo Sapiens also it is kingdom Animalia. Usually it's based on the fact that both are animals. And the phylum Chordata, Homo Sapiens is also phylum Chordata, and that feature to be considered as Chordata. The 3 main features: presence of notochord, presence of dorsal tubular nerve cord, and pharyngeal gill slits at some stage of life. So that is what makes these 2, Panthera as well as Homo Sapiens, to be considered under phylum Chordata. So that's a general characters. That is the general characters that help them to be classified into same phylum Chordata. And both are mammals that gives birth to young ones. But when it comes to order, it is a carnivora. Whereas Homo sapiens, they are primates. And the family, there's a deviation from order onwards. Order for Panthera, it is Carnivora, family Felidae, genus Panthera, and species Panthera pardus. So these both are not at all, when you see, it is not at all related, but somehow the general characteristics up to class makes them come under same class. From there, it's the dissimilarities that is used for classification. So genus, it is Panthera, and species, it is Panthera pardus. It's pardus, so you call it as Panthera pardus. And for Homo sapiens, the genus, it is Homo, and species, it is Sapiens. So it is both the similarities as well as dissimilarities is taken into consideration. The kingdom, phylum, all this take into account the general characters, whereas specific characters are taken into account when you go for further classification into order, genus, as well as species. Binomial naming of organisms, it's purely based on morphology, and it was proposed by Linnaeus, where the first two words indicate the name of an organism. The first word designates the genus to which other species belongs. The first name, that is its genus, and the second name is its species name. A genus contains one or more closely related and similar species, and the second word is the binomial, denotes the species itself. So if it is genus might be same, but species, so again specific characters, when they are looking for specific characters, you could say that it could be classified as species. Genus may be having the common characteristics, and the species may be having different characteristics. Domestic cat, Felis catus. The word Felis indicates genus name, and catus, that is its species name. Also for Felis bengalensis, that is again belonging to this genus, but the species is bengalensis, which you call as leopard cat. And the jungle cat Felis chaus, also Felis is the same genus name, and chaus is species name. And usually once we have said about Felis catus, again we are speaking about the same genus, the species of the same genus, then that is abbreviated as F. catus, italics, it's in italics, and F. chaus. The generic name always begins with a capital letter, whereas the species name always begins with small letter. The generic name, it starts with capital letter. The species name, it starts with small letter. Both generic as well as species name, if you are typing it in a system, you need to make it into italics, and if you are writing it, then you need to underline genus name as well as species name. Then there is trinomial nomenclature. When the species are related, there's a subspecies 1, then that you call it as trinomial nomenclature, where you have three names, genus, species, and subspecies forms the name of an organism or a group of organisms. Trinomial nomenclature is used when some species, due to their different habits, show minor changes in external features. To differentiate the subspecies, the third name is given, and the subspecies name is also written just like the species name. An example is the Pakistani crows and Indian crows. They are known as Corvus splendens. The Burmese and the Sri Lankan crows, they are slightly different and known as Corvus splendens isolans and Corvus splendens Protegatus respectively. So there is a subspecies for this species. So trinomial nomenclature is used in that context. And the binomial nomenclature, binomial system of nomenclature is the one that is accepted by the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature ICZN. Species. A biological species is a group of organisms that can reproduce with one another in nature and produce fertile offspring. To be called a species, you need these animals need to be of a particular group of organisms which can reproduce and produce fertile offspring. The species is the basic category of grouping used in taxonomies, and species are distinct from each other in appearances, behavior, habitat, with less obvious differences in physiology, biochemistry and DNA sequences, which makes its genetic makeup. And species, the concept of species is mainly by biological species concept, morphological species concept, as well as phylogenetic species concept. According to biological species concept, this is the oldest version, and this was proposed by Dobzhansky and Ernst Mayr for identifying species, where it was the reproductive isolation of fertile offspring. Production of fertile offspring was considered as the concept for consideration as species. That is why it is known as biological species concept. Ernst Mayr has given the definition that species is a reproductive community of populations that occupies a specific niche in nature. They are reproductively isolated from other groups, but they reproduce within that group. If they reproduce within that group to produce fertile offspring, but are reproductively isolated from other groups, then that is known as species. Accordingly, a species can be defined as a population of individuals that have the potential to interbreed in nature, producing viable and fertile offspring, but do not produce viable fertile offspring with individuals of other such groups. This reproductive isolation is due to absence of gene flow between members of other species due to reproductive barriers. And these reproductive barriers might be different in different cases. Different types of reproductive barriers may be, in case of birds, it might be their signal or the call. That call might be different. So again, that is a type of reproductive isolation. It's not only in the reproductive organ, but everything concerned with reproduction that comes under reproductive barriers. And these could be prezygotic, preventing fertilization, or postzygotic, that is producing infertile non-viable hybrids. An example for biological species concept is Sternella neglecta and Sternella magna, and it's because of the change in the distinct songs that it produces which prevents interbreeding between these two species. So when it becomes reproductively isolated, it is known as species. But all organisms in a species, they should be able to reproduce among themselves, producing fertile offspring. Morphological species concept. Morphological species concept. This species concept, it's based on the morphological differences. The criteria of differences in shape, size and other morphological features emphasizes the unity within species, and biologists conclude that differences in morphological features are most likely to arise if the populations are independent. It is useful as it can be applied to sexually and a sexually reproducing form as well as to fossils. But the main disadvantage of morphological species concept is that scientists they cannot agree on a common feature that is able to distinguish the species. And the morphological species concept, again, eastern meadowlark and western meadowlark are the examples where it is it's difference between the species, it's morphological difference between the species that makes them classified into two types of species. Phylogenetic species concept, this is a new one where it is identifying species based on the reconstruction of an evolutionary history of phylogeny, and it considers species as the smallest group of individuals that have descended from a common ancestor, forming one branch on the tree of life, and who all possess a combination of certain defining or derived traits. This concept defines a species as a group having a shared and unique evolutionary history where it is they have changed with time. Again, the degree of difference required for defining different species makes a disadvantage of this phylogenetic species concept. And phylogenetic species concept, so this is how a phylogenetic tree is drawn so that it could easily define the species concept. Present day practice, the identification and description of animal species is based on these three concepts of biological, morphological as well as phylogenetic species concept, using reproductive isolation, morphological features and common ancestry, and by using sequence information from a standard gene. These all help in nomenclature of organisms. And present day, the mitochondrial gene encoding for cytochrome C oxidase subunit CO1, which contains 650 nucleotide base pair, is the standard barcode region for animals. Any deviation in this nucleotide base pair, actually this helps in confirming the species. Molecular techniques have proved of extreme value for modern animal taxonomists, but traditional taxonomic methods, they are more valid and reliable. Classifying organisms, a number of closely related genus or genera, they are grouped together into a family, and a number of closely related families, they are put into an order, a number of closely related orders into a class, a number of closely related classes into a phylum or division, and the various phyla or division is classified into a kingdom. The highest category of classification is kingdom. Another higher category is there which is known as domain has been added to include the kingdom. The names of higher categories are often synthesized from Latin words in the same manner as generic or specific names, and always starts with a capital letter. Reptilia, amphibia, mammalia, etc. they are written always in capital letter, whereas its common versions such as amphibians, mammals and annelids, they are written in small letters. And taxonomic terms above the level of genus and species, they are never italicized, and it shows the 7 main hierarchical taxonomic categories used in classification and gives you an idea of the classification of organisms. And though 7 ranks have been used to recognize the 7 taxa, some other classifications are again present, subdivisions are present, which include superphylum, superclass, superorder, suborder, superfamily, subfamily and others for any particular group of organism. Wherever there is requirement for relevant classification, there you can find superphylum, superclass, superorder, suborder, superfamily, all such subdivisions of these main 7 rankings. So this is classifying organisms. All species are members of a genus, are large groups that contain many species similar to each other. Uh, Panthera pardus is the scientific name for a species of panther. Pardus is the species name, Panthera the genus name. And this is about coyote and grey wolf, Canis lupus and Canis latrans, how it has evolved. Domain is Eukarya, kingdom Animalia, Chordata phylum, Mammalia class, order Carnivora, family Canidae, genus Canis, and only the species name, there's the difference. And modern classification system, it's based on R.H. Whittaker's or Robert H. Whittaker's classification of five kingdom classification, where the kingdom it is divided into five kingdom classification, where kingdom Monera contains the prokaryotes, kingdom Protista containing the single-celled eukaryotes, protozoa, as well as unicellular algae, and all multicellular organisms, they are included in kingdom Plantae, kingdom Fungi, as well as kingdom Animalia, including the non-chordates as well as the chordates. And this five kingdom classification of Monera, Protista, Plantae, Fungi, as well as Animalia is the presently recognized one, which is proposed by Robert H. Whittaker. The recent classification, based on the information in the sequence of genes and ribosomal RNA, American biologist Carl Woese and his co-workers proposed in 1990 that the fundamental difference between organisms is not based on presence or absence of a nucleus, but living organisms descend from one of the three original lines derived from a common ancestor. They have classified three, and the first one, the bacteria, comprising all true bacteria, the archaea, differing from bacteria in membrane structure and ribosomal RNA sequence, and related more closely to eukaryotes than bacteria. So bacteria, archaea, and the third one, the eukarya, including all single-celled and multicellular forms with a formed nucleus. These three major groups are now called domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. These are the domains that come on top of all the kingdoms. So this is the classification: bacteria, archaea, as well as eukarya. Then animals are there, fungi, plants are there. From there it is the different phylogenetic tree that has evolved.